everyone, and welcome to HERdacity's Community Over Competition panel. My name is Lorelei Gonzalez, and I'm the Program Director for HERdacity. HERdacity is a nonprofit dedicated to inspiring confidence in women to achieve their professional goals. And I am really glad you chose to join us this evening as we discuss the benefits of being in community with one another. Now, I am joined by three incredible panelists, and I will take a moment to introduce them. Now, first note here, Courtney White in the center was intended to be our third panelist, and she had an emergency just about a few hours ago and sends her apologies and her compliments to everyone here today. Hopefully she might be able to join us later, but we were really lucky to have a wonderful stand-in for us in the way of Dr. Joy Wiggins. Now, Dr. Joy Wiggins is a professional speaker, coach, professor, and author. Hi, Joy. We are also joined by an entrepreneur and human capital investor, the founder of Leadership Box, Rachel Green. And last but not least, I have writer and social entrepreneur, the co-founder of Rage to Rainbows and founder of Collective Flow Consulting, Emily Weltman. Hey, Emily. Okay, so this evening, we're going to be discussing the concept of being in community with others, but specifically with women, what that means and how it can help or hinder us. Now, to be clear, when I say community over competition, I am not advocating for an end to competition. Competition is a natural thing and can be healthy in the workplace, depending on your sector. Now, what we are advocating for is a priority of solidarity over competition amongst your fellow women-identifying colleagues in the workplace. Now, while in this moment I am explicitly talking about women, I want to be clear that in our feminist support of one another, this support must extend to other underrepresented groups. While women are technically a majority population across the world, for millennia we have been oppressed and suppressed. And it's important that we keep in mind everyone else who has experienced this type of oppression and extend our support and solidarity to them in the workplace and beyond. Now, those who do not fit into the cis white male heteronormative culture of America have often been implicitly, if not explicitly, told through various types of socialization that they do not belong in certain spaces, nor is there space for their person, their experience, or their opinions at the decision-making table. As our world and cultures shift into more inclusive places, we want to encourage all of you to come together and support one another throughout your career journeys. Transitioning away from a climb the ladder over top of one another approach to the model of a staircase, one where we can all go up together. Because together, we can create better cultures, better communities, and more positive experiences when we are in community with one another. Now, work in the world are hard enough, and I don't want to make it any more difficult for each other. So that's why today we're going to be talking over the benefits of community over competition. Now, these three incredible folks have joined us in this discussion to share their experience and their expertise to aid us in our evolving understanding of community and give us some supportive advice moving forward. So I would like to kick off our conversation with Joy. Joy, please describe being in community to us.
Hi, everyone. Well, thank you for having me. And I hope Courtney has speedy resolve to her emergency. So I'm going to do my best to fill in. So to be in community, I imagine as I was thinking about this is, we are all different people and we all have different experiences. And I think when we're in community with one another, we might have a collective goal, but we also at the same time need to realize that we're all different, very different people, and we're having very different experiences of the world. And I think when we want to be in community, when we want to be in solidarity with someone, we need to understand maybe our collective history as women, to understand how we have become divided, but also how we have come together. So really understanding our history. I'm big on history of the feminist movement. And the other thing I would say is building that trust by listening to one another and being willing to suspend your own judgment about who you think you are with, or who you think you are when you are in community. To be constantly willing to change your behaviors, willing to change your perceptions, and also be willing to be surprised when, when you realize something about yourself that perhaps you didn't know or could have learned, or maybe you've done something that was not always towards the collective goal of the community. And I would say that that's something that is really important, to be willing to learn and be surprised at the things that you can learn and grow with. So that's my answer.
Love that. Thank you, Joy. Do either of you have anything else to add?
I think my next question is sort of related to it about solidarity, so I'll just kind of go off of that, but a little bit in that I think it's interesting. There's this to contrast what Joy was saying, this idea of, sorry, and by the way, of course, I checked my sound, and there's a window open here, and somebody decided to do some manual labor. So hopefully the earbuds cover it. So, solidarity to me, and what I've, sort of learned over the last couple of years, in my business, and I work with mostly independent, small women-owned businesses and people from marginalized backgrounds. And so often they don't have access to capital, they don't have access to resources or learning, but what they do have is community, right? And so usually that's what they do, is they show up for each other, right? And with solidarity, it's a big message in the community work that I am involved in, which is like small business entrepreneurship and then this mutual aid community. And it's actually much more about the collective than the individual. So it's what's for the collective good, and thinking about what, putting yourself kind of last. And especially if it's not, if you're not the person that's struggling, like for me, for example, when I work with Black women, like I'm not a Black woman, I center them, their struggle, their work, and listen to them and have them tell me what they need. And to me, that's how I show solidarity, rather than kind of trying to figure out like where I fit in. It's how I can put the community that I'm serving first.
Thank you for that, Emily. Now I want to transition from solidarity and being in community to the competition side. And for that, we're going to go to Rachel. Rachel, how do you think gendered competition in the workplace can negatively affect our women-identified colleagues?
Yeah, well, competition definitely among males versus female dynamics is definitely like a negative stereotype. But when looking at competition in a workplace between two women, there are several things that kind of come to play. First, the first thing that comes to mind is creating a divide among women and our community. So just building that wall of tension between each other can come into play when competition arises. Competition can also create that crab in a barrel environment, taking each other down instead of collaborating and building each other up. And then lastly, but not least, this mindset that there can only be one. And I see this played out with many organizations when they're examining their diversity numbers. I do some consultation for some leaders at different companies, and I often hear them say, well, we have one Black plus leader, one Latinx leader, and one female leader who also identifies as Black. So we're doing pretty good. And I'm like, no. So that's not diversity, especially when there are like 20 other senior leaders who identify as white males. So yeah, equitable diversity is key. But when it comes to competition and how it plays out, it's played out in a few different ways. And some of those are self-inflicted, us just thinking that we have to fight and battle each other, while some are brought onto us by other places. So it comes in different forms.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Now, Rachel kind of mentioned a little bit of how this gets started. And I want to go to some of the root of these perceptions. I want to talk about socialization for a minute. And I want to go to each one of you individually. What messages did you receive from society about what a woman is supposed to do or who they are supposed to be? And I'm talking like your occupation, your behavior, your appearance, your personality, your emotional responses, even something like your family dynamic or like childbearing. Who would like to take this first?
I'll go. I have no problem talking about that. So I write a lot about this, what the expectations around what is professional and who defined all of that. And you know, building off of what Rachel said, you know, the idea of competition was designed when they created capitalism, that they wanted a market of competition, right? They didn't want a market of solidarity. They didn't want us working together. They want to divide us over and over and over again. And I think that the same way that it works between competition, it works on the individual level, that they want to shake your confidence, right? They want to give you messages that tell you that you don't belong in the community, right? You don't belong in business, you don't belong in leadership, you don't belong in the room. For me, that has always played out in this idea of like professionalism. I just really reject it. I always have, because when people say be professional, it's usually lobbed, especially at women, as it's a retaliation tactic, right? It's to make you quiet and shrink, and it implies that you're doing something other than what is expected. And generally it's because we're just speaking up and using our voice, and, you know, getting worked up is unprofessional. And, you know, having blue hair, which I've had for 20 plus years, is unprofessional. And, you know, I think I was born this way, like outspoken. And so sometimes I thought it was me, because it's my personality to be really loud and talk a lot, obviously, and fast. And when I moved out to Oregon from New York, I thought, oh, you know, is it because I'm a New Yorker? I'm Jewish. There's definitely like a conversation style that's really different. We interrupt each other and talk over each other. And then I just realized it was just straight up patriarchy and sexism most of the time. I mean, they're definitely overlapping, because, you know, colonialism was designed from a puritanical religious standpoint of this is how to behave, right? And I don't behave that way. I never have, not from that culture. And so I think, you know, the ways in which I mean, the messages I've gotten in meetings, and like even just, you know, I've written about this moment like 10 times, but there's this like, you know, C-suite, I'm running this room of 40 people as a project manager, running this giant pitch meeting for an advertising agency on like a Saturday. And, you know, most of the guys, I want to say, you know, they just wanted to hang out. And it was Saturday. And I'm like, I want to work or go home to my family, right? I've been working 80 hours, it's the summer. And they whispered, like, you know, I tried to kind of get everybody rallied, like, all right, we're going to start the meeting and here's what we need to accomplish today. That was my job. I was a project manager or a producer. And I remember distinctly hearing the guy, one of the, you know, the managing director, like whisper in the back, like, who is that? And they're like, oh no, it's just her, you know, like, and it was said in this very dismissive way. And I mean, that was sort of towards the end of my corporate career, because that was one of those things where I was like, I just can't work in this environment when people don't even value my time, right? And so, or what I have to say.
Well, we value your time very much, Emily. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Rachel, would you be willing to share some of the messages you've received about who a woman is supposed to be, who you are supposed to show up as?
Yeah, so I have to say that, you know, I was lucky enough where my parents were like, you can go and do anything you want to. They were advocates for higher education and thought that that was the path forward. But if that wasn't my journey, my mom was a serial entrepreneur. I get that from her. And so she just was like, hey, go out there, do it and try it. But what I will say that, outside of like professional growth and career, that there were, other things personally that I think that were kind of things that kind of hindered me in some ways, like labels for women being modest, humble, the things that I was not able to do, but maybe my brother was able to do, right? So I think that some of the safeguarding and them, not knowing that those would be longstanding things that I carried on with me and being fearful to try different things or do different things, that was something early on that kind of carried on. Oftentimes I'm asked like, if I could go back and talk to my younger self, what would, I say? And I'd be like, be fearless, go after it, don't be afraid. And I think that that's something that kind of like started in early childhood and like, hey, like watch where you go. Or if I'm in a certain role, oh, don't pick that up because you might hurt yourself, and I'm like, no, I'm strong. I can do this. I can move this ladder. But, sometimes I would lean into it and like, yeah, go ahead and move the box for me, but knowing that I could do that and like leaning into that power, leaning into that strength and not following or having fear to guide my steps. So.
Thank you, Rachel. Joy, what about you?
I love that, Rachel, because I completely agree with both of you. You have like these mixed messages, I think. On the one hand, you get the message that women are powerful and that we're heroes and we're these wonderful, we can do anything. But at the same time, you have to walk this fine line of being humble, letting your fear guide you a lot of times. I was rock climbing once and with my mom, and it's so funny because had been rock climbing for a while, but she'd come to visit me, and she was like eating her popcorn, going, "No, oh, just oh," like and she was like, and she's telling me, "Don't go hiking at night," and I'm like, I am not going to live my life in fear. I can't. And I think that but it becomes so ingrained sometimes, those messages from an early age, they're so hard to shake. And I think if we have this, for me, I have to have a dialogue with myself every single day. I have Post-it notes all over my house of just like, no, it's okay. Everything I usually have on there, everything's going to be okay. Relax. Because as an entrepreneur, and y'all can probably concur with this, it's hard, and you have to be a self-promoter. So the humility aspect of all of that sometimes has to go out the window. You have to be able to be strong in your negotiations, your terms when you take on a client. Even when I was negotiating my salary at the university, I was called harsh, what was I called? Forceful. I was called forceful. I've been called a lot of things, but forceful was one of them. And I was like, I was just prepared. All I had, what was forceful about me having my resume with me and my student evaluations? That is not forceful. That's prepared. So, but the fact that I had the audacity, the HERdacity to go in and ask for something that was rightfully mine, to negotiate, to not have that fear, and to be willing to walk away, I think, and not stay someplace out of fear, but be willing to take a chance on yourself and to walk away from something that's toxic or not good for you. And the last thing I would say is trusting my intuition has been something that I was not socialized with. It was, no, that's not, you might feel that way, but that's not what's really happening. And a lot of times I was kind of conditioned not to trust my intuition and my gut. And I think women are, many times socialized to not do that. And now I'm really wholeheartly embracing that. And when I make any decisions, I really just listen to my gut and like, what do I want? Not not the shoulds or the coulds or the woulds, but what do I need and want? So.
Oh, I love that. Joy, I want to dovetail off of what you said, specifically going back to self-promotion for just a second. Self-promotion is one of those things that everyone really has to do. We have to have our own professional brand and advocate for ourselves every step along our career journey. And self-promotion is one of those things that you don't go get that like self-promotion 101 class. but you are socialized in it in a way. And so often women get skipped over for that socialization. Women are supposed to be the modest, the demure, the Wonder Women, but quiet about it. And you're not supposed to talk about how great you are, how awesome you are, how kick-ass your consulting firm is, and the millions of dollars you made for that company. And I'm here to tell you that is wrong. You have to go out and advocate for yourself and self-promote every step of the way because you're awesome and we need to know about it. The world benefits from knowing about it. So one of the things I want to talk back to y'all about is the things that we are encouraged to do. And I want to go kind of in reverse order here. So I want to start with you, Joy, and ask you what type of implicit or explicit encouragement did you receive to compete against other women or other underrepresented groups for what might be considered a scarce resource, kind of like what Rachel mentioned earlier, like a job that, maybe there's only just like that one woman out there for it, or the board position, the diversity seat, or the promotion or a special project that usually would go to maybe the boss's son or something like that.
Yeah, well, I will just refer to my book. Where is it? It's right here. I know a lot about that. And I'll put the link in the chat. But this book in my TED Talk actually came from the situation at my university that we were positioned to compete with each other. So in education, which is the department that I'm in, it's majority of women. Now, if you look at the administrative aspect of education, there's a lot of men, white men in particular. With the professors and the instructors and the people that go out to the field, the schools, you'll see much more women. So in my department, it was the Department of Education, there was mostly women, and there was a huge influx of us that came in, and we were kind of the new folks. And the department was run, or the school was run by a woman, and she created this atmosphere of it's kind of a really nebulous, or just not clear what the guidelines for promotion were. And I think there's this lack of transparency, but then we were expected to, as new folks, do every committee. And I was dragged up to North Texas doing stuff. I was being pulled all over the place. And I was young, and I didn't really understand that I had parameters to my job, and that there were boundaries, and that you don't have to go outside those boundaries just because your boss asks you to. But you also have to have a backup plan if you don't do that. So for us, we just thought, she would ask us to go and do all these different projects, to be on these different meetings. And I was just running from one thing to the next, I'm like, is this going to get me tenure? Is this going to get me tenure? I don't know. And so when I started to really realize that perhaps this was not the best environment for me, was when a woman came into the elevator, and she was on this is my famous story. When this woman came onto the elevator, and I had recently lost weight, because my weight is always up and down. And so she said, "Oh my gosh, you've lost so much weight. I mean, you were huge before. You were like out to here and like awful, And I just thought, what? And I think what it came from was that I was coming down from the dean's suite down to our level where our offices were. And what was I doing up there? And it instilled, this is my perception, that it instilled this fear in her, like, oh no, there's this FOMO, I'm missing out on this big opportunity, that Joy's up there. Why is Joy up there and I'm not up there? Was there something I missed? Because there was such lack of transparency. And it was such a hierarchical, white supremacist, steeped in colonialism, steeped in white supremacy and patriarchy, that the structure of the institution could not handle transparency. So, that to me is where this all comes from. And when we are transparent, and we are collaborative, and we are open, and we all have a voice in the structure of which we're working, then that transparency is just there. But I think when we are steeped in such, the academy is so steeped in the ivory tower, and it's so steeped in very traditional, I mean, I think more so even sometimes in corporate, but I don't know, I haven't really worked in corporate as much, but I think that a lot of that just breeds that sabotage, and it breeds me being encouraged to do one thing because I'm of a particular identity. I talked to Black women, other professors, and that left because they were getting a very different experience. I was getting one form of microaggressions, they were getting another form, and had we not talked to each other, we wouldn't have seen how it was happening for all of us, but in different ways. So that's, you know, when, I mean, it's a really big question. It's hard to be succinct in that answer, but you know, I've been encouraged, whereas some of my colleagues were not. And so there's that sense of mistrust in some aspects. And that's where that mistrust, you know, just starts to undergird everything in the institution and in the organization. And so that's where that transparency is so important.
Thank you for that, Joy. I really appreciate that point about trust and transparency. Is very, very important. Rachel, I want to go over to you and ask you about the implicit or explicit messages you've received regarding competition.
Yeah, I was listening to Joy and I'm nodding my head because as a Black woman, I'm like, I essentially have to compete with everyone. So when you look at that question, I'm like, I can't narrow down a particular situation outside of when I was running for a pageant that I was actually like, I felt like competing against another woman, right? Or something like that. But oftentimes, like in addition to me running my business, I do work in corporate America. And like Joy mentioned, for promotions, I'm competing with a number of people. At one point, I was going up for a promotion, and the company that I work for, they're not transparent either. And you don't know who's up for promotion or what's going on. And then 2 weeks before it was time for them to go into what we call calibration to determine who was going to go up for promo, I found out that it was one of my female teammates. And it was an awkward situation because I was like, yeah, like I'm hoping we both get it. And she was just like, I don't want to talk about it, so it was like this weird dynamics because she didn't really know how to play it. I think that there had been some talks about like there can only be one promo for this team. And so there was a bit of competition on that side. But I'm just not one of those people that like approaches, even if we are competing, as it being a like competition where I have to like be negative towards you. Like I'm rooting for one of us to win. Of course I want myself to win, but I'm going to do my best. I'm going to shine, and you do your best and you shine, and let's just see where it lands. So yeah, that's kind of a difficult, like I can't really narrow down.
I understand. I appreciate you endeavoring to do so. Thank you. Emily, we're going to you next, sister. What can you narrow down for us as far as the implicit or the explicit messages or encouragement around competing against other women in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think that my experiences have been, I mean, it's hard to say. I've had jobs where my job, it was me or her. I had that job at Nike, a job at Nike, and it was like, we were partners. She was the Europe counterpart to my role in the US, and then we were competing, but it was unsaid, right? And then she got a job. They offered me a different job. I took severance, and I ended up going back to work for her. She was so awful to me at the end. And then I actually went back to work for her freelance a couple of years later when, because she sort of came over and took over the US region, and it wasn't going well. They needed more help. So I basically went back to help them out with my old work. And she took a very interesting road, which was to pretend that we had never met before. Which I was like, I'm gonna just go with it because I don't care. I had just had a kid. So that had been a couple of years, but it was just so bizarre. And granted, there was a lot of cultural differences as well, right? This was somebody from Europe and not the US. It was very strange. But I will say, and I was seeing in the chat a lot of people commenting, academia is really rough in this way, and that's been my experience as well. And from colleagues and clients and even myself. I think that has to do with, and two things that you both touched on, which is like, one is the transparency, right? So current business structure is not compatible with the community that we want to seek, in my opinion, because of the competition, because it was based in this capitalist, cutthroat, exploit people, pay them as little as you can to make the maximum profit. It prioritizes all of the things that we don't, right? Like if we put community first and the people that need support first, it's going to be the opposite. Academia is the same way. And I think that has a huge part of that is like the colonialism that influenced it. When you look at like the top 10 schools, right? That's like Oxford and Harvard and all that, and they still operate in much that same way. So even though they may DEI wash their website or put up a statement, if you dig any deeper, and we've all probably experienced this, there's no meat behind it, right? So I think for me, it's not, I can tell you tons of stories about competing. I've always just like thought it was, I just don't do it because my business basically turned out to be that all of my clients are also my competition. Like it's all blurred. So we're all just trying to make it. We're all consultants and independent creatives and small shops, right? Trying to get our small businesses off the ground. And so we serve each other different things. Somebody gives me design, I help them with, communications and brand, like you were saying before, the self-promotion. So if you need help selling yourself, come talk to me. So, basically, we each do what we're good at, but the lines of who is a client, a community member, a colleague, a teacher, and then your direct competitor, I just don't think that it really exists. And in fact, putting my CRM together, keeping track of everyone, it's been really hard because I'm like, how do I even classify this person? I work with them in so many different capacities. But I think that to me is the future of work. That's where we want to go, because we don't want that old model. It didn't work before. It was too hierarchical. It wasn't transparent, and it was really hurtful. Like it just didn't support us, and definitely doesn't support the way that we want to, live and work.
So thankfully, we're living through a time of change and active evolution in the workplace. This is very exciting. So next, I want to talk about a specific example of not being in solidarity with others, which can show up as sabotaging behavior, creating unhealthy and possibly toxic work environments. And I don't even have to do a survey to know that everyone has experienced an unhealthy or toxic work environment. They're just so rampant. So the specific example I want to put before y'all today is the queen bee example. Now, the queen bee is a woman who made it to the top, and she went through the ringer to get there. Maybe it seemed like a rite of passage. Maybe it was the only way to be successful. Maybe she had to give in to playing, the man's game, or subsume part of herself and not be authentic at work to show up in a way that was expected of her, to be quote unquote professional, as Emily mentioned, or successful in the way that we perceive success, or maybe at one point used to. And the challenge of the queen bee is that she then looks at the subordinates coming after her and thinks, well, if I had to go through that, you do too. So I kind of want to go in like a little tiered question style right now. I first want to go to Emily and ask you, have you ever experienced a queen bee scenario? And if so, how did that type of sabotaging behavior make you feel?
Okay. So this is new to me, this whole idea of sabotage. Not that doesn't happen, and it oh my goodness, that I just never used that word before. Queen bee also to me and is a little bit outdated. So in thinking about, we were talking about something else earlier in this chat, about, I think some of it is generational, right? So like the idea of, I think it was Joy and even Rachel too, the messages we tell ourselves or the conflicting messages, newer generations aren't getting the same messages. And so, in group settings that I've been in with younger women professionals and non-binary professionals, they're like, no, we're confident. Nobody's listening to us. We are just so frustrated. Why is this not happening? And that's sort of how I was, but I was the anomaly, and that is not an anomaly anymore. So I think some of it's generational. So I think the queen bee idea is also generational, and maybe that term for me, I never heard that term before, but I get it. I've worked for C-suite women that were in their 60s when I was in my 30s. And, I remember like, as a young 20 something with, when I wasn't actually a very nice person to work with, I will say I was like young and obnoxious and thought I knew everything in my early 20s. And I was probably that annoying white woman that, just was like, oh, just let's go. But also I was a New Yorker in Oregon. So it was like this whole like cultural thing. Anyway, there were a lot of times when somebody in a different generation would not necessarily sabotage me, but definitely not necessarily respect me, and also not want to change their behavior. And I think that I could see how I very easily could have become that, right? Like I think it's a very easy understanding that we're all fighting the same system, right? We're all fighting under white supremacy, patriarchy in corporate America, right? And we either like get along with it or we push against it, and it's a balance for everybody. But I think it's really easy to understand how women felt like they put in the work, and maybe they look at younger generations having easier. But to me, that's also just like, as you get older, right? Everybody looks at the kids and goes, oh, they don't even know I had to walk both ways in the snow uphill or whatever that expression, and with my kids, for sure, I they're struggling, but they have different struggles. So what I will say is that a lot of times when that was happening, they didn't know it was happening. They didn't know they were still doing it. So they were really advocating for us as the younger generation or the newer up and coming, right? And they're running the C-suite. And they're just a little bit oblivious to what was happening, right? Or they just didn't really recognize what we're struggling with. So again, going back to the idea of community and solidarity, I just try to listen to the, especially to the younger people and the newer people in the room, like what are the problems they're dealing with, and a lot of it's similar.
Thank you, Emily. Rachel, going to you. Staying on the queen bee topic for a second.
Yeah.
How would you suggest other women handle possible encounters with these queen bee types?
Hopefully with grace. We were talking about grace and humble. I think that there's three things when you're considering dealing with a queen bee. One, understanding what makes a queen bee a queen bee. So some people think that confidence that drives a woman to be competitive or a strong leader, that it might just come from, other places, but it might actually be a driving force from insecurities or maybe some things that are going on at home, or maybe their professional clock is kind of ticking and they feel like they're running out of time or that they should be at a certain space. And so they want to like block people from doing things. That could be something. Two, set and respect each other's boundaries. Like that's the next thing to make sure that you do. Power recognizes power. I say that often. So if you are also a queen bee, it's important for you to try to unite forces and become a power team. Determine what goals you want to accomplish together And what goals are you willing to help each other out with? And then the third one would be to admire her and never compete with her. I think this is one of the things that many women do wrong. So I always say as well is that like God gives us talents and strengths and no one else has those talents. The way I'm going to say Rachel is not the same way you're going to say Rachel. So find out what works for you and lean into that, and then let her do the same. We talked about building community, and I think that those are the three things: understanding what makes a queen be a bee, setting and respecting each other's boundaries, and admire her and never compete with her.
Oh my gosh, Rachel, absolute fire. Thank you so much for that. Joy, I want you to build on that for just a second, to kind of continue Rachel's thought of remedies for this. And I want to specifically kind of address that mentality, that kind of competitive, sabotaging mentality. What type of remedies might we employ if we look in the mirror and find ourselves engaging in that behavior, or if we're around someone who, as we pointed out, might not necessarily be aware of that?
Yeah. Oh, Rachel, that was gold. Like, yeah, that's so good, because I think, rather than like, getting into the fight mode, let's take a step back and ask some good critical questions of, why is this person behaving this way? What have they had to deal with? How many times have they been replaced by someone? Knowing, especially if we're new to something, we don't know the history that they've had to deal with. So I think one of the best things to remedy that situation is to ask them critical questions. Ask them, not critical in the way of, what's going on, but like, I would love to take you out for coffee and, just really learn more about you. And I would love to hear how you experience this workplace. How did you get to where you are? I would love to see you as a mentor. And I think for women, so many times we just want to be recognized and appreciated. And so possibly that is what's going on. And I imagine, just like what Emily said, it is mostly generational. That's the experiences I've had, where I've had a queen bee. They've been definitely older than me. They've been through more stuff than I have. So finding out from them, asking them those questions. So number one, asking those questions of, what's the history of this place? What's been your experience here? How can I support what you've already been doing? You might have had an initiative or a program or something that you're passionate about that you have brought forth to work. How do I help you with that? And so really, and rather than playing into the competition, subverting it completely, going around it completely, and just being like, how do we work together? How, just like what Rachel was saying, how do we come together and strategize? And that's kind of what ERGs are for too, right? Is to strategize those things. So, helping her with that. The other thing is, I would say, standing up for that person in meetings, not allowing other backbiting to go on, because that's really easy to do. And I've certainly partaken in that, because I was new when I had my first sabotage situation. And I think that we learn sabotage from a very early age. My daughter's in 5th grade, and she, experiences the mean girl stuff. So we've been socialized as women to compete against each other. So when we start to break that up, I mean, it would not be good for the patriarchy and white supremacy for us to come together across many of our differences, across racial lines, gender identity lines, all, backgrounds, as women, to come together. Can you be quiet? The 5th grade was making noise. But just to come together and think about, how do we subvert this whole thing, this whole system together? Because that's what's going to do it. It's not going to be us individually competing against each other and thinking that this is just an individual fight. This is all of our fights. And in order for us to break up the hierarchy, the capitalistic white supremacy, I love how Bell Hooks talks about it. She says it really fast. It's white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalistic, heteronormative structures. How do we break those up completely? By coming together with each other. So knowing our collective history, know who is in the room, understanding that the effects of police violence against Black and brown people are affecting us all the time, affecting people differently. So how do you extend that empathy? If there is something going on in that person's life individually, how do you extend empathy? Just knowing who's in the room with you, and knowing the different struggles. So for me, as a queer woman, when I hear, homophobic slurs, I love it when somebody can say something and I don't have to. I will, but if just knowing who's in the room with you. And so I think, being a model for that, but also watching folks that do that really well is good. Be brave in having those critical conversations with the men, not letting them get off the hook. I'll give you a really fast example for this. I was in a conversation, there was a guy that was speaking to a women's group, and he said, was telling me how women are heroes, blah, blah, blah. We're like, oh yeah, we know that. But what he said was, I think that, women, we need to have a woman president. And so I raised my hand. I said, well, what conversations are you having with men in order to give women the access to those opportunities to become president? And he said, oh, well, that's not a good answer. He just goes, well, I think that women, if I were to do it again, I would just make sure my daughter, with my daughters, I would make sure they understand to be leaders and that they can be leaders. I'm like, no, that's not the question. We know we can't. That's not it. I'm going to reframe the question and ask you again. And so I didn't let him off the hook. And I said, and he still didn't answer that. He said, men aren't asking me these questions. I'm like, that's because you have to start the conversation. So I would say also, if we want allies, how to be a good ally, how to model being a good ally, but also calling people to task, to calling them in to say, hey, this is how you can be a better ally if you want to be. If you say you are, this is what it looks like. And then allowing them to do the education and the work to get to that point too. I have more.
Thank you, Joy. I appreciate that. I wanted to just tack on another remedy here. After having listened to y'all for the past 40 minutes, I've been really appreciative of how the three of you amplify each other's messages. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with amplification is the process of repeating an excellent point made by typically a woman or an underrepresented person and making sure it isn't forgotten or stolen or, gosh, there's a really fun word for it. And it'll come to me in a minute. I'll share it in the chat. But, brocriation. It's not bropriated in the conversation. So practicing amplification in conversations is another really helpful remedy for sabotaging behavior. Now I'm going to switch over to our next segment, and we're going to go a little quick on this one, folks. Rachel, we're leading off with you this time. I would like to know how we can still show up with our competitive sides while not sabotaging others in the process.
Yeah, I think that we need to stop looking at competition as a war of the death and start thinking about it as an opportunity to showcase our best. Unless you are like a rotten person who just enjoys undercutting people, spreading gossip, or gaining access to things through cheating, then sabotaging your competition should be the furthest thing from your mind. One of my favorite quotes is that a leader knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. And nowhere within that quote does it say that a leader does it all by themselves. So I would love for everyone to just remember that you always will need a team, and burnt bridges do not rebuild themselves. So sabotaging the competition will just lead you to a longer road travel. So just focus on what you have the power to do and how you can show up as your best. And that's all you can do.
Thank you, Rachel. Emily, to you, you have been our solidarity cheerleader throughout this conversation, and we're going to stick with that theme for just another second. Yep. Please share some examples of ways that we can show solidarity with our fellow colleagues at work.
Okay, so I'm like, I wanted to check on what Rachel said, which is funny because you talked about amplification. I think that we've all touched on it. And it does relate in that, Rachel said it well, we're not at war, right? And so the idea of all these war analogies comes up for me a lot because I'm really interested in language and how there's this competition, right? And it pits us against each other. We have to fight, right? You have to the same thing with the virus. We're at war with the virus. We have to fight the virus instead of like the language we use around. We have to come together. We have to collaborate. We have to join, whatever, all that. So for me, it's one of the first things is just shifting your language. The other thing is, I think we've all talked about this, coming as yourself, doing the work to understand the community that you're working with and the different people that you're collaborating with. Doing it even when it's uncomfortable, especially for white women, when you feel like you're going to mess up, because you will a lot, and that's okay. And then the other thing too is just to remember you're not for everyone and they're not for you. So on the flip side of what Rachel was saying about we can all get along and we can all bring strengths to the table. I think that there are just some people that you're just not gonna. I have a t-shirt that says I am not for everyone, over and over. And when I have a bad day where I can tell somebody didn't really adore me or I didn't adore them, I just throw that on and I'm like, it really does kind of, you can't be for everyone. It's a big world. And so, I think so remembering that also can help you from trying to get stuck in that push and pull of convincing somebody that you're worthy or convincing somebody, that you have good ideas, because that's just a losing, it's a losing battle. There it is again, the war mentality, right? To fight. So I think that is one thing. The other thing it sort of gets at the heart of what you're asking, which is what can you do to be an ally, right? Because we all want to be allies for each other, not just bringing each other into the community. For me, I think about it as a couple things. One is the struggle is real, but the struggle is relative. So it's not that we need to hierarchically go, okay, I have these intersectional identities and these are all the things that impact me at work. But we should acknowledge that some people do have a harder time. The other piece of it is you don't know what anybody is going through, and you don't know how much that toxic workplace is still with them. And so what happens is, and this I think came up before, is that they may act really poorly about something, but if you can try to get more information, you may find out why. And I think of toxic workplaces like toxic relationships, which they are, especially if you had a really bad queen bee or a boss or somebody that really impacted you. It's like an abusive relationship. It triggers you, right? So somebody in your next job asks you to do something and you lose it. And this is something that I've worked on so much with my clients this year. It's what we need to do when we leave corporate America is actually unpack the toxic workplace the same way we unpack our bad relationships. And I am telling you that for every single person I've worked with this year, we probably spend more time on that than anything else, because and my own instinct is to think that we're doing something bad, right? So if I ask you to, for example, do a calendar and you're like, I don't want to do calendars. I'm not, I want you to respect me. And then I get really stuck in this small business and I'm like, can you please, I need help with my calendar, right? That makes that person oh, they don't respect me. They don't see me. They don't hear me. And I didn't know that they were feeling any of that. I just know that they're upset. So what can you do to kind of get more information out of people when they don't want to do something, to also help them? Because when I unpack that with people, and even myself, when I'm like, why do I hate that so much? And I remember a bad relationship. Oh my God, remember when that person made me do this and made me feel like such garbage? Then I don't have that, I free myself up to do that with other people. But I think when we start working together in solidarity, we're suspect. Everybody's sus, right? We're just oh, they're totally out to get us. But, again, I've never used the word sabotage, but that idea that you can't trust people is so ingrained because you can't in corporate America, because there is no transparency. But if you're building your own org, you just have to kind of keep reinforcing you are safe here. It's okay. Come with your full self. Yeah, you're sick. Your kids are sick. Hang up the phone. Just be with your kids. And say it over and over again until people really feel like they can do that. That's definitely what I'm, trying to do with people I work with.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate that. Joy, over to you. I would like for you to share how we can be more mindful about being in community with other women out in the world at large.
I would say it's okay to be vulnerable with other women, but know who you're with. I always have a caveat, like protect yourself. And when you are in community, learn, listen to the community, be there in solidarity, but also, whenever we are, this is difficult for me to be succinct about it, but I would just imagine that we can really feel that I'm trying to think about what I was going to say and now I forgot. Sorry, that's me being vulnerable for y'all. I forgot what I was going to say.
I love it. Thank you.
Let me have somebody else answer that question.
But yeah, you were saying that you know who you're with, so be vulnerable to a point.
Thank you. I got distracted by something over there. Yes, thank you, Emily. Yeah, I would just say, when you have your protective suit on, know that you are going out into the world, but that at the same time, the more that you can show your vulnerability and your kindness and your empathy, the more others can let those shields down. And so I think sometimes, but that's not at the point of hurting yourself, right? So that self-care and that mental health has to be there for you to go out and be in community with folks to where we can all have that vulnerability with each other. You know what I mean? It's like this kind of it's a balance that we have to strike. Because I think sometimes we want to go out and we're like, I want to be vulnerable, but like, oh crap, somebody just took advantage of that. Or, so having that and being able to, like what Rachel was saying and Emily was saying, just having those boundaries too, and knowing what the boundaries are before you go out into the world, and having that self-care and that mental health fortitude so that you can be that for others. I mean, you want to also be a model and a mentor for others, but you have to do the work yourself first. So that's kind of how I would say that.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Joy. I wanted to just throw it open really quick to any attendees who might have any questions for our panelists. You can send it through the chat or the Q&A feature. While we might be waiting for any questions, I wanted to ask each of you one sentence, one pearl of wisdom that you've gained through your career journey that you wish another woman had told you about when you started out.
I wrote down.
Oh,
I did, because of that I did write down. Okay, one, you're not imagining it. So if you feel that something's happening to you, it probably is. Okay, that's that. Ask for a mentor. You have the right to find someone that's a mentor, maybe somebody in a different industry than you, somebody that you deserve to not go this alone. And finally, negotiate always. And negotiate terms, not just salary.
thank you, Joy. Rachel?
Yeah, like so many popped into my head. Like Joy, the first thing was like feedback is a gift. I was always like, as a young professional, afraid when everyone said like, "Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?" And I would like freeze up, right? Another one is someone told me a long time ago that like women are so resourceful. So say yes and find the team to support you. Like we can get things done. We always shy away from things. So say yes and find the team to support you.
Thank you, Rachel. Emily? Last word.
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, I have to say that I want to have a whole conversation about negotiations because so much to unpack over that. But I will say two things for me that pop out is you're never too big to do the dirty work. If you have really junior staff, even an intern, and you give them something to do, and then the intern job, like the mailroom has to happen and you have to fill out a whatever form, do it yourself. And that's a really great way to show solidarity. It's a really great way to build a team. And also it had a huge impact on me when I was really young in my 20s. And, people that I thought were like really big, had these huge jobs would say, oh, no, you can keep sketching because I was a designer, and I'll do this, like the thing that was, my intern job. So I would say never too big to do the dirty work, especially as a small business owner to do it all. And then the other one is, the hardest transition is often a first level manager. So somebody said this to me once, really stuck. And it really honestly made the whole transition a little bit better, which is that I'm going to use the example as a designer. So I was a design director. I was from a designer to a design director. So now all of a sudden I was managing more designers than I was, like a couple ones. And I was managing a team. And my boss said, it doesn't matter how good of a designer you are anymore. So you spent your whole career working on this skill, right? And it doesn't matter. Now it matters how good your team is. And I think that transition to first level manager and knowing that like you are not actually being evaluated on what you got your job in. You're being evaluated on how good your team is at their job, and that's your job now. Was a really big mind shift, but whew, so helpful.
Awesome.